High school. Senior year. Girlfriend of 2 years cheats on me. Hurts bad. Decide to end it all. Family has no guns, and I have none myself. Take a rope and head into the woods. Long story short, I hang myself. I remember the world going dark. Then nothing. Then I'm waking up, shaking like fucking crazy. It's early February in Vermont. Not sure how long it's been, but I'm lying on the ground, with the rope beside me. It somehow came untied, which seems weird. Fuck, it's freezing. Decide not to try again tonight. My warm, cozy bed is calling me. Head home. Drift off to sleep. Have a weird dream. My uncle, who recently died, is in it. He was one of the only people who ever looked out for me. Without getting too much into it, my parents aren't exactly the best people. Uncle kinda helped raise me. One of the only people in my family I actually liked. He died last year. In my dream, I'm a kid again. We're chilling on Uncle's porch. We used to do that a lot, and Uncle would tell me stories. This time, we're just sitting there, staring at the woods. He finally turns and says one thing. "You owe me one." Wake up. It's the next morning. The dream is still vivid in my mind. Feels super heavy. Decide to man up and get over my shit. Decide to make Uncle proud. Start the lift. Pick up some other hobbies. Dedicate myself to school too. Graduate and work my way through school. Just got my bachelor's degree this spring. Starting a master's program soon. Not sure if my failed suicide and the dream were a coincidence, but it didn't feel like it. Thanks, Uncle Tim. I miss you. Well, I don't know who skinwalkers are, but I encountered someone roughly resembling one back in the day. Be me, Soviet military, border zone guard, stationed deep in the woods on an island called Nysar in the Gulf of Finland. Island is small, boring really, mainly looking for illegal border crossers. Only 5 men are on there with me. It was a small island. One night, while patrolling the beach, I see someone moving in the water. Think it's a refugee. Yell out in Russian twice. No reaction. See that it slowly starts to move towards the forest. Can't make out details, but the fucker seems to be moving on all fours. But backwards. Paranoia gets to me as I shout out one last time and fire a shot into the air. The fucker speeds up, so I fire at it. It reaches the forest, and I ain't going in there. I was sure I had hit it at least once. Run back to Commander, report what I had seen. Nothing else happened after that. Only that one comrade died of food poisoning 2 months later. Still didn't go into those woods. It might have just been one of Gorbachev's experiments from Sector 12B that we weren't warned about. Sector 12B was a Soviet test facility started in 1969 in the border zone. It was well hidden and had high security. I only knew one man who had been in there. I asked him once, but all he said was, "Don't go near it." Not much is known about it, but supposedly, it was a testing ground of biological weapons and gene mutation. The Soviets were losing in the Cold War arm race and needed a new weapon. They, allegedly, tried to make better soldiers. There were many rumors about the place, and many nearby inhabitants reported strange encounters. The building was half underground, and the visible area was disguised as a cement factory. In 1986, the Soviets abandoned the place. No one knows why, but they left in a hurry. Whatever they were doing in there was set free. That was around the time I was serving in the military, about 30 kilometers away from the place. In 1990s, before the Estonian military took control of the facility, a man and his son went down there to steal scrap metal. They both died of radiation poisoning. Also, I remember this. Walking down a road with rain, patrolling as usual, 10 kilometers from the sector, heading through an abandoned uranium mining settlement. The Soviets had a plan to dig up half of Estonia to get the uranium in the northern soil, but the empire collapsed. I see a man standing in the side of the road. His face is mutilated, nose gone, mouth twice the size, and no earlobes. Leprosy? I ask. I hope so, for our own well-being. He replies as we walk along. Later, I found out about the sector. I went to school in the peak of Cold War. Every week we had a lesson in which we trained for nuclear fallout. Our country was annexed by Russia. We never wanted to be a part of it. But that didn't stop America from targeting our soil with their missiles, since there were many test facilities and rocket bases there. We were handed gas masks and suits to wear, in case America attacks. America was our enemy, the great source of all that was evil. We believed that, not because we wanted to, but because we were forced to. One day, we noticed that some of the kids started losing hair and teeth. We didn't think much of it, but soon, men in full hazmat suits put the school on lockdown and took the sick away. I haven't seen them since. After 2 months, we were allowed back to school. Turns out, there had been a security breach in one of the facilities, and the water was contaminated. That is what they told us. But we all drank the same water in school. Why did only some of us get sick? One day, me and a couple of other boys discovered that there was a full-sized bunker underneath the schoolhouse. It was filled with strange things, which I later found out were nuclear weapons. The dozen kids who got sick supposedly went into the bunker and got radiated. They were taken away because they knew about the nukes. They were executed. Families were told they died of radiation. We could have been killed too, if we had been caught. On the bus, heading home from work. I'm tired. It's late. Nobody on the bus but me, an old black man, and some white kid in a jacket and a cap. Glance at the kid in the cap, and notice he's staring at the palm of his hand. Watch him for a sec. His entire hand rotates 360 degrees at the wrist. It looks like it's on a swivel. Guy looks up, sees me looking at him, but doesn't react. I get off at the next stop. You want OC? Fine, OC. Be me. Last summer. Be visiting elderly mother on Isle of Skye. Lives in remote tiny village on Sleep Peninsula. Driving to town on main road to get shopping for her. Nice day. Occasional gusty winds. About 1 p.m. Road is quiet. Only me driving. Hear sudden rush of wind noise on my right side. Sounds exactly like a car overtaking me at high speed. Think nothing of it. Funny gust of wind is all. Get shopping in town. Return to mother's house. Unpacking shopping. Jokingly say, "Lol, I got overtaken by a ghost car." Mother freezes. "Where, Anon? Did you see it? Where its headlights on?" What the fuck, that PNG? Explain that it was just a funny gust of wind that sounded like a car passing me. Mother explains that for decades on the Sleet Road, the locals have known about a ghost car. Usually at night, they see headlights coming, pull over the side of road and passing place to let it by. Single track road until about 15 years ago. Wait ages. Headlights disappear. A couple of people got run off the road by it. Headlights appear behind them, coming at speed, about to hit them. They swerve onto grass to avoid collision. Get stuck on soft mud. No car passes. No headlights. This has been happening there since the 1950s. Drive that road regularly. Never hear gust of wind like that again. Not so sure it wasn't a ghost car now. It's not great OC, but OC is OC. Pick related is the Sleet Road from Google Street View, to illustrate how remote it is. This was a story my uncle would always tell me as a kid during summer vacations, to entertain us children. The following was treated as the unadulterated truth by the entire family, especially my uncle, who was generally discouraged by the family from telling anyone. I can't possibly do justice to how my uncle would tell it, but here goes. Be uncle, 12 years old, growing up in shitty suburban town in northern Ontario. For privacy reasons, I won't say the name. Growing up there meant complete boredom for any young person involved. The most you could do was play baseball or fish in one of the local rivers. Kids who didn't start underage drinking or narcotics at a young age were drawn to the woods as a form of entertainment. The town was spread out, but not heavily populated. Just meant that there was a bunch of empty houses and empty lots. Uncle has best friend called T and a younger sister called S. Obviously, I'm not going to use real names. Should probably clarify that S is T's sister, not my uncle's. Wording at the start is confusing. These kids would fuck around constantly in the woods, blocking up rivers and making shitty forts that would collapse within months. Uncle had a fascination with mapping out the whole place, constantly plotting new ones whenever something new was discovered. Section of the town that was not so populated was affectionately and historically referred to as Weston. Thus began the stories of the Weston Manimal, an urban legend in the shitty suburban town that went way back. It went by other names, but My uncle's generation called it that after the TV show, Manimal, that was popular at the time. One neighbor owned the DVDs of the first season he ordered from the States. Would have TV parties with the show. In the western section of the town, dogs would show up dead, and trash was rummaged through on almost weekly basis. That, combined with a legend of a wild man or animal person in the town, made kids go crazy with their adventuring, trying to find it. Senile old people in the town would tell them stories of seeing a pale humanoid figure in the woods. Uncle and friends wouldn't always believe them, but sometimes they would take what they say to heart. Parents were advised to educate their kids on the dangers of the woods, not because of the legend of the manimal, but because there were generally some dangerous bears and coyotes in the woods that could fuck a kid up. Kids played this off as, they're protecting us from the manimal. Imagination and fear in the kids got so bad that some teachers had to sit all the kids down and just tell them that the manimal was a stupid old legend and the town made it up generations ago. This just made my uncle and his friend T want to prove it even more. One day, a kid from the class says their dog went missing and is asking everyone if they saw it. Uncle thinks that the western manimal must have gotten it. Decide to check their maps to see which places in the woods they haven't gone before. One big old hilly area in the middle that they generally stayed away from, about 1 kilometer wide. Only reason they hadn't gone there yet was because one of the rivers that flows around the town wraps around it, and it gets too wide and too deep to wade across easily. The other side of the area was thick brush that no one made a path through. Also couldn't get through that easily. Decide the time is now. If the western manimal isn't there, then it doesn't exist. Being 12 years old, and stupid, they decide to begin their expedition to find the manimal, including sandwiches, a carton of milk, and 4 cans of Pepsi. No flashlights because autism, but bring binoculars to search for it. T decides to include his little sister, S, who was a couple years younger than them. The 3 begin construction on a shitty boat made of cheap wood and glue. Ended up being more of a raft that just looked like a boat. At least, that was how my uncle described it. This is what they would use to cross the river since it would take too long to cross the other way through the thick brush. They grab 2 paddles and put on their stupid red and blue ball caps to begin their epic journey. They leave just before dusk one day, without telling their parents, because, well, you could do anything as a child back then. They start walking, carrying their dog-shit boat raft, and struggle all the way through the woods, past their forts that saw many a night in battle, past the old gravel pit, where they would light gasoline on fire for fun. Eventually, make it to the river, probably 40 feet to cross at this section, whip out their paddles, and start paddling. All 3 pile into the hull. Way too much weight. The fucking boat starts leaking as soon as they paddle. Being stubborn, autistic kids, they think it'll make it there and back. By the time they get to the other side, the boat's completely sunk, and they're all wet. Still have some daylight left, and decide they'll just head back through the thick brush afterwards, despite the time it would take. T tells his sister to check out the other side of the area, while the 2 of them look up around the hills. The 2 march up the dry gravel hills to a miniature cliff face on the other side. They're looking down for any signs, but can't make anything out. Patiently stay quiet and wait for S to come back. Eventually, they hear something down the cliffside of the hill. They both look and see something moving down there, near a hole in another smaller hill. Something's moving by stream of flowing water. Uncle puts his binoculars up to his eyes. When telling the story, Uncle always chokes up at this part. Looks down at a small greenish gray humanoid, completely naked, roughly the same size as my uncle, about 5 feet, incredibly skinny, arms that were too long for its body. It had nasty matted black hair on its head, at least 1 foot long, wavy and scruffy, obscuring its face. It had cuts and bruises all over its dirty, naked body. It almost looked emaciated. It was dragging something behind it with its incredibly long fingers, and even longer, overgrown nails. A cut open golden retriever. Definitely the missing dog that belonged to my uncle's classmates. It stopped for a while as T and my uncle were dead silent. Then, it looked up at them. My uncle was still staring at this thing through his binoculars. With what little sunlight was left, he could make out its face. He always described it the same exact way. Its head was way too round and big for its body, almost spherical, with an underdeveloped forehead, super skinny neck with what appeared to be a giant Adam's apple. The long scruffy hair on its head was stained with blood and dirt. It rolled down its face and obscured some of it. Its eyes were bulbous, black, and sticking out too far. A mouth that was way too wide to be normal, going from one side of the head to the other. Its skin on its face was darker and really tight, almost stretched. It didn't have a fucking nose, it didn't have any fucking eyebrows, it didn't have any fucking ears. My uncle has no idea how long he looked at the thing. Eventually, it calmly walked off towards its hole in the ground. T was shaken and tried to get my uncle to talk. T didn't get as good of a look on the thing, but he did see its shape. Uncle was borderline unresponsive. T shoved him down the hill. They made a fuck ton of noise, but needed to find S as soon as possible and fuck off back home. The sun is going down at this point, and it starts to get dark. They start running towards the other side of the area where they sent S. T is starting to panic because they can't find her. Uncle starts to become more responsive as they try to look for her. They don't want to make noise in case they attract that thing. T starts whisper shouting, calling out his sister's name. My uncle stops him from making noise. They can hear the thing from the hole start walking towards them in the brush. They know it's not S because of the noises it is making. They sprint back the way they came, around the opposite side of the area, closer to the thick brush. They hide in some bushes for a bit once they're on the other side to catch their breath. S isn't calling out to them, but if she was lost in the woods, she should be making noise. This makes T scared as hell for his sister. A quicker way through the brush was closer to where they saw that thing dragging the dog. They devise a plan to get home as quickly as possible and tell their parents, so they can come to the woods with guns and find her. They wait a few more minutes as it gets darker and darker. The two start running for the brush, but hear a noise. Both freeze, duck behind a fallen tree. The thing from before comes out into a clearing. Can't see my uncle or T. It's dragging something else. A much smaller dog. Looked brown but couldn't make it out, since it was almost completely dark. The little dog is bound with some sort of rope or crude vines. It's squealing and barking up a storm. The thing starts to torture the little dog, cutting it with its nails in certain spots and pinning its head down. All the while, this thing bobbed its head up and down and made a raspy, laughing-like sound. Could barely make out that it was smiling. It started skinning this dog alive and tearing at its meat. Eventually, the dog stops moving as the thing begins to eat it. The two slowly begin inching away, trying to make as little noise as possible. As they're walking away, my uncle looks behind them. The thing is standing straight up, looking directly at them. Uncle panics and screams and starts pushing T to run. The thing begins to chase them. All my uncle can do is run. He gets split up from T. After a few minutes of running, he was still in the area and didn't make it through the thick brush, only ran along the edge of the area. He can hear T screaming off in the distance with some other inhuman sounds that he couldn't place. Uncle tries to run to find S while the thing is distracted. Runs to right where they sent S when they showed up. Not a trace. Eventually, he finds her backpack, slightly ripped on one side. He gets worried. He begins to look further in the direction in the backpack. Runs past some trees. T screaming is starting to get louder. Uncle sees something small and long underneath a branch. It's a fucking arm. It's S's fucking arm, wrenched right off of her body. Next to it was a shard of her shirt. Uncle freaks out, begins running blindly. Trees and bushes start cutting at his face and legs. He keeps tripping and stumbling in the pitch-black woods. After running for what seems like hours, he finds a dirt road he recognizes. He begins sprinting alongside it in the direction of home. He hears more screaming but isn't sure if it's real or just his imagination. Running and bleeding at the same time is exhausting him. He eventually makes it to the town hall and goes the usual route from there to his house. Uncle runs into his porch at full speed and collapses while trying to open the door. Around this point, there's a gap in my uncle's memory. He can't visualize any of this, but it's what his parents, my grandparents, told him. From my grandparents' perspective, he had been out playing for much longer than he should have. Once the sun went down, they called all of the neighbors to see if they knew where he was. Eventually, they called the police and asked for an officer to come to their house to help find my uncle. When they were talking to the officer about what they should do, my uncle ran into the porch, then ran into the door. He was bleeding heavily from cuts on his legs and one on his arm. He was completely unresponsive and delirious, presumably from the running and adrenaline overdose. He was unresponsive and borderline comatose for the next several days. Grandparents thought he hit his head, but local doctors said it was more likely symptomatic of a traumatic experience. My uncle stayed in his bedroom until he started talking. This is when my uncle starts remembering things. T and S never came home that night. Their parents weren't the worrying type and didn't report it till the next day. My uncle was unresponsive during the search period, so no one got any information out of him on what happened to T and S. By the time my uncle was back to normal, some cops asked him what he was doing that night and what happened to T and S. At the time, my uncle tried to convince himself it wasn't real. He also didn't want to get in trouble since it was his idea to look for the Weston manimal. He kept his mouth shut. To this day, he says it was the biggest mistake of his life, but he was too traumatized to tell the truth. Kids in his class began to spread rumors that the manimal must have gotten T and S, that it climbed into the rooms in the middle of the night and killed them. Teachers and adults told these kids to be respectful to T and S. A few weeks later, my father was born, and my grandparents wanted a better life for their two sons in a bigger city. They moved shortly after, and my uncle never heard from T or S's family ever again. He claimed that he suffered from serious stress after the incident, that he keeps having flashes of guilt of what happened to his friends. My uncle still told us the story though, much to our older relatives' dismay. I think it was therapeutic for him to get out his feelings about the incident, rather than just repressing all of it. He left the gory bits out when we were younger, but as we got older, he told us more and more details of the story. He would avoid details of the dogs and the arm, but the way he described that thing was always the same. It was burned into my imagination as a kid, and would sometimes give me nightmares. Now that I'm older, I'm not afraid of the story. It's just one of the saddest and most disturbing family stories I've ever heard. I've never really believed in the paranormal or the supernatural, but every time my uncle tells me this story and describes the disgusting, sadistic black eyes of this thing, I believe him. I remember somebody once describing how to, quote-unquote, enter the mirror world, and that he had done it on several accounts. It is difficult because every time you try to enter a mirror, you hit an obstacle, and you can see it right in front of you. Try to put your hand into the mirror, and it stops right at the fingertips of your reflection's hand. In order to pass into the mirror, he claimed you need to find a way around your reflection. To do this, he suggested something along the lines of arranging a 3-mirror triangle, all facing one another, so that each mirror reflects infinitely inwards upon the next. Then, sliding them closer and closer together, until such an angle that you can approach a mirror nearly perpendicular and not collide with your reflection. It may also have had something to do with covering some of the mirrors at some point, or breaking one of them, but I can't remember. Either way, he basically described the mirror world as literally a mirror reflection of ours, but dead silent, with mirror image versions of people in our world, and many empty spots that have no people, items, animals, colors, and etc., where I guess no mirrors in our world were ever constructed in those places, and thus, no mirror image of our world to create mirror life, only the suggestion of a building being there or something. The mirror people go about their daily lives, which basically involve mimicking our exact daily lives, but only capturing the details that can be seen from our mirrors. Anything not in the range of a mirror ends up blurry, colorless, or flat and featureless. However, aside from his first visit, it was never just a curious little jaunt. While the mirror people cannot perceive you in any way, they are tangible. It's just that, since you technically don't belong in their world, they have natural right of way, being literally immovable and unstoppable. He advised against ever getting in a mirror person's way, and always keeping your eyes about you, just in case you end up in one's path. Every trip, according to him, carried a cost. He was not the only human to know about the mirror world. He described hearing radio chatter amid the silence, especially when he often noticed black cars rolling around that no mirror person would notice. From his observations, It had seemed that our governments had already been aware of the mirror world long before him, and already had a presence there, attempting to use it somehow, to either figure out a way to extract resources from it, or to somehow use it as a secure, secret, near-infinite storage space, or a safe space in a catastrophic event. He described how they were often seen installing some kind of surveillance devices in people's homes, working right under the noses of mirror people, reflecting a living room scene, completely unaware of the suits working around them, tucking these things into corners, and hiding them in cabinets and shelves. His theory was that the government was using these as a form of reverse surveillance. While the devices are audible and visible to us in the mirror world, and one could just pick one up and toss it away, the dynamic would work in reverse, with the mirror world installed devices being silent, invisible, and non-tangible to us in our world. So, we wouldn't even notice them, and if we unknowingly break one, the suits in mirror world replace it without us knowing. However, the devices are believed to be able to record data from both worlds and output two simultaneous displays that the suits could watch from mirror world. Regardless of what they were there for, there were a few times they nearly caught him. Somehow they could tell that he wasn't a mirror person, and anytime they caught sight of him, they immediately started moving towards him and chasing him until he could get back out of the mirror that he entered, promptly switching the mirrors away from each other in our world again. He was always on the lookout, always on the run in mirror world, always being watched by someone. And then there's the other thing too. I just remembered why the guy mentioned covering or breaking some of the mirrors during the entering process. Just as you are entering a mirror from an angle where you won't collide with your reflection no longer is able to collide with you. You enter the mirror world. Your mirror self enters our world. Covering or breaking the mirror that your reflection would emerge from while you enter prevents it from passing through. So, once you enter mirror world, if you didn't fuck up, you should also see your own mirror self, standing completely still, staring into the broken, covered mirror, waiting for you to uncover it, or look into another mirror from our world, to summon it, to mimic and reflect you again. With you in the mirror world, your reflection basically has no input. This may be how the suits ended up tracking him down. Either way, he never dared to step in front of his mirror self as it stared into its not mirror, to look it in the eyes. He mentioned something about how our eyes themselves are reflective, and he simply did not want to fucking test what would happen when you do the kind of shit that would cause the internal logic in a video game to cause a hard crash.